The days following the incident at the dealership brought a whirlwind of activity for both Maria and James. Word of what had happened spread quickly through Willow Creek, thanks in part to James's decision to address the issue publicly. He didn't name Greg or the rival dealership outright, but he shared the story during interviews with local media, framing it as an example of why respect and inclusivity mattered in customer service. No one should ever feel dismissed or belittled when they walk into a business, he said firmly during one interview. It's not just about selling cars. It's about treating people like human beings. Maria watched from the sidelines as her husband became a vocal advocate for change. At first, she felt uneasy about being the center of attention, even indirectly, but soon she realized that their story resonated with many others. Women in particular reached out to share their own experiences of being underestimated or mistreated while shopping for cars. Some recounted stories of salespeople ignoring them in favor of male companions, while others described being talked down to as if they didn't understand basic mechanics. Each message reinforced Maria's belief that this wasn't just her fight, it was everyone's. Meanwhile, James wasted no time implementing new policies at Thompson Auto Group. He gathered his staff for mandatory training sessions focused on inclusivity and customer care. Role-playing exercises were introduced, where employees practiced handling scenarios involving diverse customers. James made it clear, assumptions based on gender, age, appearance, or any other factor would no longer be tolerated. Our job is to serve, not to judge, he told his team. If you can't treat every customer with respect, then you don't belong here. The changes didn't stop there. James also launched a campaign called Drive with Dignity, aimed at promoting fairness across the automotive industry. Posters went up in his showroom, featuring bold slogans like, "Respect starts here," and "Your voice matters." Customers loved the initiative, and sales at Thompson Auto Group soared as word spread about its commitment to equality. Competitors began taking notice too, with some dealerships quietly adopting similar practices, though none could match the sincerity and authenticity that James brought to the table. For Maria, seeing her husband lead by example inspired her to take action in her own way. She started attending local women's empowerment meetings, sharing her story and encouraging others to speak up against bias. At first, she felt nervous addressing groups of strangers, but her passion quickly won them over. "I'm not special," she often said during these talks. "What happened to me happens to so many of us. The difference is that we have the power to change it, to demand better treatment and support each other along the way." One evening, after a particularly inspiring meeting, Maria received a text from James. "You're amazing. I'm so proud of you." She smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. It wasn't just his words that touched her. It was knowing that together, they were making a real impact. Their partnership had always been strong, but now it felt even deeper, rooted in a shared mission to create positive change. Still, Maria knew the road ahead wouldn't always be smooth. Change took time, and not everyone would agree with their approach. Some critics accused James of using the incident as a publicity stunt, while others dismissed Maria's advocacy as unnecessary drama. But neither of them let the negativity deter them. They remained steadfast in their belief that standing up for what was right, even in the face of resistance, was worth it. As weeks turned into months, Maria found herself stepping into roles she never imagined. She became a trusted voice in her community, someone others looked to for guidance and encouragement. And though she still sometimes doubted her ability to make a difference, she reminded herself of the lesson she'd learned that day at the dealership. Courage wasn't about having all the answers. It was about refusing to stay silent when it mattered most. Maria's heart skipped a beat when she saw James walking toward her. For a moment, she felt a mix of emotions, relief that he was there, but also a pang of frustration. She had come to the dealership on her own, determined to handle this herself, and now his sudden appearance made her feel like she hadn't been able to stand up for herself after all. Still, she couldn't deny the comfort his presence brought. James moved with purpose, his confident stride cutting through the showroom's polished floor as if he owned the place, which, in a way, he did. Greg noticed James too, though he didn't immediately recognize him. At first glance, Greg assumed James was just another customer, perhaps someone who might distract Maria or complicate the already awkward situation. But as James drew closer, his sharp eyes scanned the scene, taking in the tension between Maria and Greg. He stopped a few feet away, his expression calm but unreadable. "Everything okay here?" he asked, his deep voice cutting through the air like a knife. Maria hesitated before answering. Part of her wanted to explain everything. The dismissive attitude, the endless stalling, the subtle insults. But pride held her back. Instead, she forced a small smile and said, "It's fine. Just trying to get things sorted out." Her tone was light, but James didn't miss the strain behind it. He turned his attention to Greg, who shifted uncomfortably under his gaze. "Sorted out," James repeated, raising an eyebrow. His tone was casual, but there was an underlying edge to it that made Greg straighten up. "What seems to be the issue?" Greg cleared his throat, clearly flustered. "No issue at all, sir," he said quickly, forcing a smile. "Your wife was just telling me she'd like to test drive one of our sedans, but we're going over some details first. Standard procedure." James nodded slowly, pretending to consider this explanation. "Standard procedure," he echoed, glancing at the clipboard in Greg's hand. Then, without warning, he leaned forward slightly, his piercing eyes locking onto Greg's. "Funny thing about standard procedure," James said, his voice low but firm. "I've always believed it applies equally to everyone. Doesn't matter if you're a CEO or a stay-at-home parent. Respect is non-negotiable." Greg blinked, caught off guard by the unexpected intensity in James's words. Before he could respond, James gestured toward the sedan Maria had been admiring. "That car right there, that's what my wife came here for. Not excuses, not judgment. A test drive. So why don't you grab the keys and let her take it for a spin? Or are you saying your dealership doesn't honor its promises?" The room seemed to freeze. Greg's face flushed red as he realized two things simultaneously. This man wasn't just another customer, and he was dangerously close to losing control of the situation. Stammering, Greg fumbled for the keys, mumbling something about fetching them from the manager's office. As he hurried away, Maria stared at James, her emotions swirling. On one hand, she was grateful for his intervention. On the other, she couldn't shake the feeling that she should have handled it herself. James turned to her, his expression softening. "You don't need me to fight your battles," he said quietly. "But sometimes, it helps to have someone remind people who they're dealing with." Maria managed a weak laugh, shaking her head. "I can't believe you showed up like this," she said. "I thought I was handling it." "You were," James replied firmly. "And you did handle it. You stood your ground even when he tried to make you feel small. That takes courage." His words struck a chord deep within her, reigniting a flicker of confidence she thought had been extinguished. Still, she couldn't help but wonder. Would Greg have treated her differently if James hadn't walked in? Would anyone have listened to her without questioning her intentions? Before she could dwell on it further, Greg returned, clutching the keys tightly in his hand. His demeanor had shifted entirely. He was overly apologetic, almost fawning, as he handed the keys to Maria. "Of course, Mom," he said, his tone dripping with forced sincerity. "Let's get you behind the wheel. I'm sure you'll love it." Maria accepted the keys silently, her mind racing. This victory felt bittersweet, tainted by the knowledge that it had taken James's presence to make it happen. As they headed toward the car, Maria glanced back at James, who gave her an encouraging nod. For the first time since she'd entered the dealership, she felt a surge of determination, not just to prove Greg wrong, but to prove something to herself. This test drive wasn't just about the car anymore. It was about reclaiming her voice and refusing to let anyone silence it again. As Maria slipped behind the wheel of the sedan, she felt a strange mix of emotions, relief that she was finally getting her chance, but also a lingering frustration about how hard she'd had to fight for it. The car's interior smelled faintly of leather, and the dashboard gleamed under the soft glow of the overhead light. It was everything she had imagined, yet the joy of the moment was dampened by the memory of Greg's dismissive attitude. Still, she pushed those thoughts aside and focused on the road ahead, gripping the steering wheel with quiet determination. James sat in the passenger seat, watching her closely. He could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands tightened slightly on the wheel as she pulled out of the dealership lot. "Take your time," he said gently, sensing her unease. "This is your moment. Don't let anyone take that away from you." Maria nodded, appreciating his words, but part of her still felt conflicted. She didn't want to feel like she needed James to validate her experience, or worse, to protect her from people like Greg. The drive was smooth, the sedan gliding effortlessly along the quiet streets of Willow Creek. Maria found herself relaxing a little as she tested the car's handling, enjoying the hum of the engine and the responsiveness of the brakes. For a few minutes, she forgot about the earlier confrontation and simply savored the feeling of being in control. But as they approached a stoplight, her thoughts drifted back to Greg. What gave him the right to judge her so quickly? And why did moments like this always seem to happen to women who dared to step outside their expected roles? When they returned to the dealership, Maria parked the car with precision, cutting the engine before turning to face James. "It's a great car," she admitted, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions brewing inside her. "But I don't think I can buy it here, not after everything that happened." James nodded, understanding completely. "You don't have to," he said firmly. "There are plenty of other dealerships that would be lucky to have you as a customer." They stepped out of the car together, drawing curious glances from Greg, who hovered nearby with an anxious expression. Before Maria could say anything, James stepped forward, his presence commanding attention. "Let's talk," he said to Greg, his tone calm but unyielding. Greg hesitated, clearly unsure what to expect, but eventually led them to a quieter corner of the showroom. Once they were alone, James wasted no time getting to the point. "I couldn't help but notice how you treated my wife earlier," he began, his voice low but firm. "She came here wanting nothing more than a simple test drive, and instead, she was met with condescension and disrespect. That's not how customers should be treated, ever." Greg opened his mouth to protest, but James held up a hand, silencing him. "Save the apologies. I'm not interested in excuses. What I am interested in is making sure this doesn't happen again." Greg stammered, visibly shaken. "Sir, I assure you, I didn't mean any disrespect. I was just following protocol." "Protocol?" James interrupted, his voice rising slightly. "Your protocol seems to involve judging people based on appearances rather than treating them with basic human decency. Do you know who I am?" Greg shook his head nervously, prompting James to continue. "My name is James Thompson. I own Thompson Auto Group. We sell cars too, but we do it differently. At my dealership, every customer is treated with respect, regardless of who they are or where they come from. If you're going to stay in this business, you'd better learn to do the same." The weight of James's words hit Greg like a freight train. His face turned pale as he realized the magnitude of his mistake. Not only had he insulted a potential buyer, but he had offended the wife of one of the most influential figures in the automotive industry. "Mr. Thompson, please," Greg pleaded, his voice trembling. "I'll make this right. Whatever you need." "It's not about me," James cut in sharply. "It's about her." He gestured toward Maria, who stood quietly beside him, her arms crossed. "She deserves better than what you gave her today. And if your manager doesn't agree, tell him to call me personally." With that, James turned on his heel, leaving Greg standing there, speechless and sweating. Maria watched the exchange with mixed feelings. On one hand, she appreciated James standing up for her. On the other, she couldn't shake the nagging thought that she should have been able to handle it herself. As they walked back to their car, She glanced at James and said softly, "Thank you for stepping in. But next time, I want to handle it on my own." James smiled, placing a reassuring hand on her shawl. As the months passed, Maria found herself stepping into a new rhythm, one that felt both exhilarating and empowering. Her involvement in the community grew deeper, and she began organizing workshops aimed at helping women build confidence in traditionally male-dominated spaces like car dealerships, banks, and tech stores. These workshops weren't just about sharing her story. They were about equipping others with tools to navigate similar situations. She taught participants how to assert themselves politely but firmly, how to recognize bias when it happened, and most importantly, how to support one another. James was her biggest cheerleader, often attending these events to show his support. "I've always admired your strength," he told her one evening after a particularly successful workshop. "But seeing you inspire others, that's something else entirely." Maria smiled, feeling a sense of fulfillment she hadn't experienced before. For so long, she'd seen herself as simply a wife and mother, a role she cherished. But now she realized she could be more without diminishing those parts of her identity. She was becoming a leader, a voice for change, and someone who refused to let anyone feel small or invisible. The impact of their combined efforts rippled through Willow Creek in unexpected ways. Women who attended Maria's workshops began visiting Thompson Auto Group, not just because of its reputation for fairness, but because they wanted to meet Maria herself. Some brought their daughters, hoping to instill the same confidence and resilience in the next generation. Others shared stories of how they'd applied what they learned, standing up to dismissive salespeople, negotiating better deals, and even pursuing careers in fields they once thought were out of reach. One day, a young woman named Clara approached Maria after a workshop, her eyes shining with gratitude. "I came here thinking I couldn't do anything about the way people treat me," Clara admitted. "But hearing your story made me realize I don't have to accept it. Thank you for showing me that." Maria hugged her tightly, feeling a lump rise in her throat. Moments like this reminded her why she kept pushing forward, even on days when self-doubt crept in. At home, Maria and James continued to work as a team, balancing their individual passions with their shared mission. James expanded the Drive with Dignity campaign beyond Willow Creek, partnering with other dealerships across the state to promote inclusivity. Together, they hosted community events where families could learn about car buying, financial planning, and advocacy, all while enjoying food trucks, live music, and activities for kids. These events became beloved traditions, drawing crowds from neighboring towns and solidifying the Thompsons' place as pillars of the community. Still, Maria never forgot the sting of that initial encounter at the rival dealership. It served as a constant reminder of why her work mattered, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been underestimated or dismissed. She often reflected on how far she'd come since that day, the insecurities she'd overcome, the courage she'd discovered, and the connections she'd forged along the way. Each step forward felt like reclaiming a piece of herself, proving that she was capable of more than anyone, including Greg, had given her credit for. By the end of the year, Maria noticed subtle changes in the way people interacted with her. Strangers greeted her warmly at the grocery store, calling her by name and thanking her for her advocacy. Friends and neighbors sought her advice on everything from career moves to personal challenges. Even James joked that she was becoming a local celebrity, though he said it with pride rather than teasing. Through it all, Maria remained grounded, reminding herself that her purpose wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about making life better for others. As she sat on the porch one quiet evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, Maria felt a deep sense of peace. The journey hadn't been easy, but every challenge had led her closer to where she was meant to be. She thought back to the shy, uncertain woman who had walked into that showroom months ago and realized how much she'd grown since then. This wasn't the end of her story, it was only the beginning. And whatever lay ahead, she knew she was ready to face it head on, with her head held high and her heart full of purpose. The ripple effects of Maria's journey continued to spread far beyond what she could have imagined. What began as a single act of standing up for herself had transformed into a movement that touched countless lives. Women from neighboring towns started reaching out, asking if Maria would speak at their events or host workshops in their communities. At first, the idea of expanding her efforts felt overwhelming. But with James's encouragement, she embraced the opportunity. "If your story can help even one more person," he told her, "then it's worth it." Maria and James worked together to organize larger outreach programs, combining his business expertise with her growing passion for advocacy. They partnered with local schools to teach students about equality and respect, emphasizing the importance of treating everyone fairly regardless of gender, age, or background. Maria loved seeing young girls light up when they realized their voices mattered just as much as anyone else's. "You don't have to wait until you're older to make a difference," she often told them. "Start now, stand up for yourself and others." As her influence grew, so did the recognition she received. A regional magazine featured Maria on its cover, calling her a quiet force for change. The article highlighted not only her personal story but also the broader impact of her work. For someone who had once shied away from the spotlight, Maria found herself surprisingly comfortable with the attention. It wasn't about fame. It was about using her platform to amplify the voices of those who still struggle to be heard. Back at Thompson Auto Group, James's commitment to fairness became a cornerstone of the dealership's identity. Customers frequently mentioned how refreshing it was to shop somewhere where they felt genuinely valued. Some even traveled long distances specifically because they'd heard about the Thompsons' mission. Employees, inspired by the culture James fostered, began sharing their own stories of overcoming bias and discrimination. Together, they created an environment where everyone felt empowered to speak up and contribute. For Maria, the most rewarding moments came when she saw tangible proof of the change she and James were helping to create. One afternoon, a young woman named Emily walked into the dealership, visibly nervous but determined. When James greeted her, she explained that she'd saved up for months to buy her first car. And Maria's workshops had given her the confidence to walk in alone and advocate for herself. By the time Emily drove off in her new compact SUV, beaming with pride, Maria couldn't hold back her tears. This was why she did what she did, to show people like Emily that they deserved to take up space, to dream big, and to demand respect. Despite all the progress, Maria knew there was still work to be done. Bias and inequality didn't disappear overnight, and she often reminded herself that true change required patience and persistence. Still, she took comfort in knowing that every small victory added up. Whether it was a teenager learning to assert herself in class, a mother negotiating a better deal on a family vehicle, or a salesperson choosing kindness over judgment, each step forward counted. At home, life settled into a beautiful rhythm. Maria and James spent evenings discussing their goals, celebrating their successes, and dreaming about the future. Their bond deepened, strengthened by their shared commitment to making a difference. On weekends, they hosted gatherings where friends and neighbors came together to share ideas and support one another. These moments reminded Maria of the power of community, the way people could lift each other up when they chose to stand united. Looking back, Maria marveled at how much had changed since that fateful Saturday morning. The shy, uncertain woman who had walked into the rival dealership seemed almost unrecognizable now. In her place stood someone braver, stronger, and more determined than ever before. She hadn't set out to become an advocate or a leader, but sometimes life pushed you in directions you never expected. And while the road ahead would undoubtedly have its challenges, Maria faced them with unwavering resolve. As she sat beside James one evening, watching the stars appear in the night sky, Maria felt a profound sense of gratitude. Her journey had been messy, challenging, and unpredictable, but it had also been beautiful. Every obstacle had shaped her into the person she was meant to become. And as she looked toward the future, she knew one thing for certain. She was ready to keep fighting, keep inspiring, and keep proving that even the simplest among us can spark extraordinary change. Maria Thompson lived a quiet, predictable life in the small town of Willow Creek. She wasn't the type to draw attention to herself. She preferred blending into the background, letting her actions speak louder than words. Every day followed a similar rhythm, waking up early to pack lunches for her kids, dropping them off at school, running errands, and then heading home to manage the household, while her husband, James, worked long hours at his car dealership. It was a simple life, but Maria found joy in its consistency. On this particular Saturday morning, however, Maria decided to break free from her usual routine. For weeks, she had been admiring a sleek sedan parked in the showroom of a nearby dealership. The car wasn't flashy or overly expensive. It was practical yet stylish, perfect for shuttling her kids to soccer practice and grocery shopping on weekends. But more than anything, it represented something new, something just for her. With James tied up with work and no immediate plans for the day, Maria decided to seize the moment. She slipped on a casual yet presentable outfit, a pair of jeans, a crisp blouse, and comfortable flats, and headed out the door with determination. As she drove to the dealership, Maria felt a mix of excitement and nervousness bubbling inside her. She didn't often make big purchases without consulting James, but this time felt different. This wasn't about needing permission. It was about taking charge of something that made her happy. Parking her old minivan outside the gleaming glass doors of the showroom, she took a deep breath before stepping inside. The air smelled faintly of leather and polish, and rows of shiny cars gleamed under bright lights. Salespeople moved briskly between customers, their voices carrying across the space as they pitched deals and answered questions. Maria approached one of the salespeople, a young man named Greg who looked barely out of college. He wore a neatly pressed suit and flashed a practiced smile as he greeted her. "Good morning, ma'am," he said, his tone polite but tinged with disinterest. "How can I assist you today?" Maria smiled back, feeling a flicker of confidence. "Hi, I'm interested in that sedan over there," she said, pointing to the car she'd been eyeing. "I'd like to take it for a test drive if possible." Greg's expression shifted ever so slightly, though Maria didn't notice right away. His eyes darted down to her casual attire, then back up to her face. He nodded slowly, as if considering her request, but his next words caught her off guard. "Of course, we'd be happy to help," he began, his voice smooth but laced with skepticism. "But before we proceed, are you sure you're ready for this kind of investment? These cars come with quite a price tag." Maria blinked, taken aback by the implication. Was he suggesting she couldn't afford it? Or worse, that she didn't belong here? For a moment, Maria hesitated. She hadn't expected resistance, just a straightforward process. But instead of backing down, she straightened her posture and replied firmly, "I understand how much it costs. Thank you. I'd still like to test drive it." Greg forced another smile, clearly uncomfortable now, but continued to stall. "Well, there's some paperwork we need to go over first," he said vaguely, gesturing toward a desk. Maria's heart sank as she realized this wasn't going to be as easy as she'd hoped. Little did she know, this encounter was about to take a surprising turn, one that would change not only her perspective, but also the way others saw her. Greg's demeanor grew colder with each passing moment, and Maria could feel her confidence wavering under his dismissive gaze. He gestured for her to follow him to a small desk tucked away in the corner of the showroom, far from the bustling activity of other customers. The polished surface of the desk was cluttered with brochures, pens, and stacks of paperwork that looked more like obstacles than tools to help her. Greg pulled out a clipboard and began flipping through some forms, his movements deliberate but slow, as if trying to buy time, or perhaps discourage her altogether. "Before we can even think about a test drive," Greg said, tapping a pen against the clipboard, "we'll need to gather some information. Can you tell me your current vehicle situation? Do you own a car now?" His tone was polite on the surface, but there was an edge to it, a subtle implication that she might not measure up to the standards of someone who typically shopped at this dealership. Maria swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his judgment pressing down on her. She nodded and replied softly, "Yes, I have a minivan. It's older, but it works fine." Greg scribbled something on the form without looking up, then asked another question. "And what's your budget range for this purchase?" Maria hesitated, unsure whether she should share specifics. She didn't come here to negotiate. She simply wanted to see how the sedan handled on the road. But sensing his growing impatience, she offered a vague answer. "I'm still exploring options," she said carefully. Greg raised an eyebrow, finally meeting her gaze. Exploring options wasn't good enough for him. "Well, Mom," he said, leaning back slightly and crossing his arms, "these vehicles are premium models. They're designed for people who know exactly what they want and can commit to it. If you're just browsing, maybe it's better to wait until you're ready." His words stung, though he delivered them with a practiced smile. Maria felt heat rising to her cheeks. Browsing. Was that really what he thought she was doing? She hadn't walked into the dealership on a whim. She'd done her research, saved up, and imagined herself driving that very sedan countless times. Yet here she was, being treated like someone who didn't belong. Maria tried one last time to assert herself. "Look, I understand there's a process," she said, her voice firmer now despite the knot forming in her stomach. "But all I'm asking for is a quick test drive. That's standard practice, isn't it?" Greg sighed audibly, as if her persistence was inconvenient. "It is standard," he admitted reluctantly, "but we also have policies in place to ensure our resources aren't wasted. We don't hand over keys to just anyone." The word hung heavy in the air, and Maria couldn't help but feel like he was talking down to her. Just anyone. Did he see her as nothing more than a housewife, with no real buying power? The tension between them thickened, making the once bright showroom feel suffocating. Other customers moved around them, laughing and chatting with salespeople eager to assist. Maria glanced around, wondering why she had been singled out for such treatment. Was it because she wasn't dressed in designer clothes or carrying an expensive purse? Or was it something deeper, an assumption based on her gender, her age, or the fact that she'd arrived alone? Whatever the reason, it left a bitter taste in her mouth. As Greg continued to delay, offering excuses about needing approvals and checking schedules, Maria's resolve began to falter. Maybe she was wasting her time. Maybe this whole trip had been a mistake. She considered walking away, sparing herself further embarrassment. But something inside her refused to give up completely. She reminded herself why she had come here in the first place. Not to prove anything to anyone, but to take a step towards something she truly wanted. Still, doubt crept in, whispering cruel thoughts. What if he was right? What if she didn't deserve to be taken seriously? Just as Maria was about to stand up and leave, a familiar figure appeared in her peripheral vision. At first, she thought she was imagining things, until she turned her head and saw James standing near the entrance, his tall frame silhouetted against the sunlight streaming through the glass doors. Relief washed over her instantly, followed by confusion. Why was he here? And how long had he been watching? As James approached, his expression unreadable, Maria realized that this encounter was far from over, and that its outcome would change everything. Back at home, Maria sat quietly on the couch, replaying the day's events in her mind. The test drive had been exhilarating. The sit-in handled beautifully, and for a brief moment, she'd felt unstoppable. But the memory of Greg's dismissive attitude lingered like a shadow, refusing to fade. She couldn't stop thinking about how he had judged her before even giving her a chance. It wasn't just about the car anymore. It was about being seen, truly seen, as someone worthy of respect. James noticed her quiet demeanor and joined her on the couch, his expression thoughtful. "You okay?" he asked gently, placing a hand on hers. Maria hesitated before answering. "I don't know," she admitted. "Part of me feels relieved that you stepped in, but another part feels frustrated. Like I should have been able to handle it myself. James nodded, understanding completely. You did handle it, he reminded her. You stood your ground even when he tried to make you feel small. That takes strength. Maria sighed, leaning back against the cushions. But what if you hadn't shown up? Would he have ever let me take that test drive? Or would he have kept making excuses until I gave up and left? Her voice carried a hint of sadness, and James could hear the weight of doubt creeping into her words. He squeezed her hand reassuringly. That's not the point, he said. The point is that you didn't give up. You kept pushing, even when it felt impossible. And that's something to be proud of. Their conversation shifted as James began sharing his thoughts on what had happened and what needed to change. This isn't just about one salesperson or one dealership, he explained. It's about an entire system that often overlooks people based on assumptions. Women, especially, face this kind of bias all the time. But we can do something about it. Maria looked at him curiously. What do you mean? James leaned forward, his eyes lighting up with determination. At Thompson Auto Group, we pride ourselves on treating every customer with dignity and respect. No judgment, no excuses, just good service. But after today, I realized we can do more. We need to set an example for other dealerships, show them how it's done. Starting tomorrow, I'm implementing stricter training protocols for our staff. Everyone will learn how to treat customers fairly, regardless of their background or appearance. If Greg's behavior is any indication, there are still too many places where people like you aren't given the respect they deserve. Maria listened intently, feeling a spark of hope ignite within her. Do you think it'll make a difference? She asked softly. James smiled, his confidence unwavering. Absolutely. Change always starts somewhere. Why not with us? His words resonated deeply with Maria, stirring something inside her. A desire to take action, to challenge the status quo in her own way. Over the next few days, word spread quickly through Willow Creek about what had happened at the rival dealership. James didn't shy away from sharing the story publicly, emphasizing the importance of inclusivity and respect in business. Customers began flocking to Thompson Auto Group, drawn by its reputation for fairness and integrity. Many were women who had faced similar experiences elsewhere and were thrilled to find a place where they felt valued. For Maria, the incident became a turning point. She realized that standing up for herself wasn't just about confronting rude salespeople. It was about challenging the biases and stereotypes that held people back. Inspired by James's commitment to creating change, Maria decided to get involved. She started attending community meetings focused on empowering women and advocating for equal treatment in all areas of life. Slowly but surely, she found her voice growing stronger, her confidence building with each step she took. As weeks passed, Maria reflected on how much had changed since that fateful Saturday morning. What had begun as a humiliating encounter had transformed into a catalyst for growth, not just for her, but for those around her. For the first time in years, she felt like she was part of something bigger than herself. And while the journey ahead would undoubtedly have its challenges, she knew one thing for certain. She was ready to face them head-on.